Keanu Reeves, an aged jacket on his shoulders, worn boots on his feet, quietly steps into the Gilded Palate, the city's most dazzling temple of gastronomy. Around him is an ultra-elite crowd, a rustle of silk and the clinking of crystal glasses filled with champagne and whispered praises. The restaurant's world-renowned but equally arrogant chef, Chef Lorenzo Rossi, sizes Keanu up with disdainful glances, his every word dripping with condescension. "Sir, are you sure you can afford this table?" His voice is sarcastic enough for other distinguished guests to hear. However, what unfolds that night at the Gilded Palate will not only leave the entire dining room speechless with astonishment, but will also bring Chef Rossi's glittering world crashing down in a way no one could have foreseen. Prepare yourselves for this jaw-dropping, lesson-filled story. But first, are you curious why the hero of this story entered such a venue, in such attire? And what big secret Chef Rossi doesn't know? The answers are hidden in the later hours of this incredible night. In the heart of Beverly Hills, that Friday evening was beating more brightly, more vibrantly than usual. The Gilded Palate restaurant, located on a quieter but equally exclusive side street opening onto Rodeo Drive, where luxury automobiles flowed in an endless stream, was hosting the city's wealthiest and most influential names that evening as always. From the outside, with its wide windows veiled by dark velvet curtains, its gold leaf details, and the two impeccably uniformed attendants stationed at its door, it resembled a mysterious and unattainable fortress. This fortress was renowned for being home not only to the finest palates, but also to the most affluent wallets and the brightest stars. Every dish by the restaurant's owner and head chef, the Michelin-starred Chef Lorenzo Rossi, was considered a work of art, and even reservations made months in advance didn't guarantee a table. One wondered, behind the walls of this glittering world, was there only flavor and luxury? Or were the darker, more arrogant faces of human nature also hidden? It was into this ostentatious and equally rule-bound world that an unexpected figure stepped that evening. Keanu Reeves, an old dark brown leather jacket on his shoulders, its leather softened and creased from years of memories, faded jeans underneath, and on his feet, well-worn but still sturdy boots that had accompanied him on countless journeys, glided through the restaurant's massive, carved mahogany doors. A well-worn baseball cap, pulled low, shadowed much of his face, and the deep, thoughtful expression in his eyes further enhanced his famous, melancholic yet profound aura. There was no trace on him of the artificial glitter of fame, no sign of those eye-catching costumes. He was just Keanu, quiet, observant, and, as always, humble. He was not there that evening just for a dinner, but perhaps for a much different purpose. Maybe an observation, maybe a quest, or perhaps just an unexpected coincidence to which fate had dragged him. What was the real reason behind this visit? And how would this reason affect the course of the night? The restaurant's anteroom was decorated with dim lighting and modern works of art. In the air, there was a complex but seductive aroma of truffle mushrooms, fresh spices, and expensive wines. As Keanu looked around, the young attendant at the coat check approached him. The attendant momentarily hesitated upon seeing Keanu's attire, but with a professional smile asked, "Good evening, sir. May I take your coat?" Keanu, politely nodding, handed over his jacket and cap. For that moment, everything seemed normal. But Keanu's experienced observer within could sense those fine, almost invisible crumbs of judgment beneath that artificial politeness. Was this initial impression misleading him? At the entrance of the grand hall, Chef Lorenzo Rossi stood. The world-renowned chef was surveying his domain from the entrance of his restaurant, almost with the air of an emperor. He wore his snow-white, spotless chef's jacket, the silk scarf he always wore around his neck, and on his face, that distant but authoritative smile he displayed to his customers. Chef Rossi was known not only for his food, but also for his sharp tongue, his uncompromising perfectionism, and a touch of arrogance. For him, the Gilded Palate was not just a restaurant, but a stage where he exhibited his art. And on this stage, there was only room for the most select audience. The moment Chef Rossi saw Keanu, the gentle smile on his face froze for an instant. His eyes, like an eagle scanning its prey, slowly and disdainfully appraised Keanu from head to toe. Those old boots, those faded jeans, that unbranded t-shirt. This man definitely did not fit the Gilded Palate's customer profile. In Rossi's mind, Keanu had already been placed in the unwanted guest category. I must handle this quickly, he thought. I can't allow such types to tarnish my restaurant's image. Keanu had noticed Chef Rossi's evaluative and not-so-friendly gaze, but paid it no mind. He walked calmly towards him. "Good evening, Chef," he said, his voice low and respectful as ever. "I'd like a table for one, please." Chef Lorenzo Rossi, at Keanu's request, replied with a condescending smile on his lips. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right place? This is the Gilded Palate. You know, it's a rather exclusive establishment. Do you have a reservation?" Keanu's expression didn't change. He just tilted his head slightly. "No, I don't have a reservation," he said. "But I thought you might have a quiet table for one at this hour, or perhaps a place at the bar." Chef Rossi was further irritated by this calmness and persistence. This man's composure was like a challenge to his authority. "The problem isn't whether there's an empty table, sir," he said, raising his voice so that other customers around could hear. "We have a certain dress code and customer standard here. And you, forgive me, don't quite seem to meet those standards." This was now, beyond politeness, an open insult. In Keanu's eyes, for a moment, there was neither anger nor shame, only that familiar, deep, questioning look. This look, for some reason, momentarily unsettled Chef Rossi. But he quickly recovered. Whoever this man was, he would teach him the rules of the Gilded Palate and who belonged here. However, there was something he didn't know. The non-standard man standing opposite him was one of the most important, most influential, and most unexpected names not only in that restaurant, but perhaps in the entire world that defined those rules. And Chef Lorenzo Rossi, at that moment, was unaware that he was about to make the biggest, most unforgivable mistake of his career. This encounter was about to escalate from a simple customer-chef disagreement into something much larger, much more jarring, and an unforgettable lesson. So, what would be Keanu's response to this insolent and derogatory attitude? And what price would Chef Rossi pay at the end of this game? Curiosity and tension had begun to seep into the glittering, gold-leafed atmosphere of the Gilded Palate, like the first ominous wind heralding an approaching storm. And that storm was waiting for just one spark to erupt. Chef Lorenzo Rossi's sharp and condescending words, "And you, forgive me, don't quite seem to meet those standards," had echoed in the opulent anteroom of the Gilded Palate. Like a whip crack. A few elite customers nearby, who had paused their hushed conversations, now cast curious glances towards this unexpected and out-of-place scene. In the carefully woven atmosphere of luxury and elegance, such a moment of disharmony was a rare occurrence and had captured everyone's interest. Chef Rossi was aware of this attention, and it seemed to further bolster his seemingly unshakable self-confidence. He was the undisputed king of the Gilded Palate, and he would put this inappropriate stranger who dared to enter his kingdom in his place. Keanu Reeves, however, showed not the slightest sign of wavering in the face of Chef Rossi's blatant attack. He maintained his calm, almost indifferent expression. His eyes for a moment scanned Chef Rossi's condescending gaze, then drifted to the curious crowd around them. He had encountered such situations before. It was a price of fame, people seeing you only as an image, failing to recognize your true identity. But this time, the situation was slightly different. This time, he had consciously left that image behind and was present there merely as an ordinary human being. And the reaction he received was, just as he had expected, a cruel prejudice. "Standards," Keanu murmured, his voice so low that Chef Rossi barely heard it. "Well, what exactly determines these standards, Chef Rossi? The brand of the jacket I'm wearing, or the numbers in my bank account?" Chef Rossi was momentarily flustered by this unexpected and cleverly phrased question. This man was not going to passively accept humiliation. But he quickly put his guard back up. "Sir," he hissed, his patience wearing thin, "I am not going to play word games with you here. The Gilded Palate is the pinnacle of Beverly Hills, and we are obliged to protect the comfort of our guests and the international reputation of our restaurant for quality and exclusivity. If you do not have a reservation, and as is clearly visible, you do not adhere to our dress code, then I'm afraid we cannot serve you this evening." This was, beyond politeness now, a direct threat of ejection. Keanu smiled faintly. This smile irritated Chef Rossi even more. "I don't have a reservation, yes," Keanu said. "But I thought in such a large restaurant, there must surely be a quiet corner for one person. And as for the dress code, I believe what I'm wearing is clean and respectable. Or is your understanding of exclusivity solely based on astronomically priced labels?" These words were a direct challenge for Chef Rossi. His cheeks flushed with anger. Just as he was about to open his mouth to deliver an even more scathing reply, Finn O'Connell, the young, timid waiter, approached them. Finn, who had just started at the Gilded Palate, was terrified of making a mistake and was trying to navigate the complex world of that luxury establishment. "Chef Rossi," Finian whispered, his voice anxious. "Our manager, Mr. Michael Johnson, is expecting you in his office, sir. He said it was regarding an urgent matter." Chef Rossi frowned at this unexpected summons. This was not the time at all, but he couldn't defy Mr. Johnson's order. He shot Keanu one last condescending look. "Wait here," he hissed. "I will deal with you more thoroughly shortly." Then, turning swiftly on his heels, he walked towards the manager's office at the back of the restaurant. He didn't fail to cast a threatening glance back at Keanu, as if to say, "Don't you dare move an inch." As Keanu watched Chef Rossi walk away, that calm expression still on his face, he wondered internally how this situation would resolve. What lesson this arrogant chef would learn? Was this just a simple misunderstanding? Or was there something deeper, darker, hidden within this restaurant, beneath that shiny surface? Chef Rossi's extreme reaction, his uncontrolled arrogance, was it just a simple character trait? Or a reflection of a larger problem, perhaps of an entire system? And manager Mr. Michael Johnson, what stance would he take in this situation? These questions were like puzzle pieces in Keanu's mind, and he would wait patiently to solve this puzzle. Because he knew that sometimes the greatest truths were hidden in the most unexpected moments, behind the most arrogant masks. And dropping those masks sometimes required just a little patience in asking the right questions. When Chef Rossi emerged from the office, Keanu was still there, calmly waiting at the entrance of the main dining hall. There was a tension and perhaps some annoyance on Rossi's face from his conversation with the manager. But his condescending attitude towards Keanu had not diminished one bit. "Very well, Mr. K," he said, emphasizing the name sarcastically. "Our manager, Mr. Johnson, has insisted that I give you one more chance. But know that this is entirely for his sake. Normally, I wouldn't even let someone like you pass this door." Then he waved his hand dismissively and called out, "Finian, take Mr. K to our special table by the kitchen service entrance and make sure he doesn't disturb our other guests." Finian, swallowing hard, walked towards Keanu. Please follow me, sir," he stammered, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Keanu looked at Finian with an understanding smile, then turned to Chef Rossi. "Thank you, Chef Rossi," he said, no trace of sarcasm or anger in his voice. "I am grateful for this special attention." And so, following Finian's timid steps, they walked through the glittering, stylish tables, past the hushed conversations and curious glances, towards that small, dim table in the deepest corner of the restaurant, right next to the kitchen door. A table that seemed almost separated from the others by a mere cloth. The table was not meticulously prepared like the others. It had a faded tablecloth, a cheap-looking vase, and a single, artificial, dusty flower in it. The clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the loud conversations of the staff, and the heavy smell of food completely cut this place off from the magical, sophisticated atmosphere of the Gilded Palate. This table was like a place of exile. "Here you are," Finian said, his voice barely audible. I hope you'll be comfortable." He placed the menu on the table with trembling hands. Keanu calmly sat down at the table. Despite the surrounding hustle, the noise, the blatant condescension, that calm, serene expression was still on his face. He seemed as comfortable as if he were sitting at the best table in the world's most luxurious restaurant. This situation further surprised and irritated Chef Rossi and some of the other staff, who were secretly watching him from the kitchen door. There was something about this man they couldn't understand, couldn't decipher. What was hidden behind this calmness? Was this a game? Or was this man truly so indifferent, so unconcerned? Keanu slowly opened the menu. His eyes carefully scanned the astronomically priced dishes and wines. Then he lifted his head and once again looked around. At a large table at the other end of the restaurant sat Mr. and Mrs. Williams, one of the city's wealthiest and most influential families, casting sarcastic glances at him and whispering amongst themselves. At a table next to them, however, sat James, an elderly man in his 60s, looking extremely elegant and wise. He was thoughtfully swirling the wine glass in his hand, silently but carefully observing the events with curiosity. James was a regular at such establishments and a good judge of character. He seemed to have sensed something different in Keanu's demeanor beneath those simple clothes. Could he guess the next move in this game? And then there was a woman sitting alone at a slightly more central table, elegant yet mysterious. Miss Genevieve Croft. Miss Croft was, in fact, one of the city's most important gourmets and food critics. But that evening, she was there incognito, to evaluate the Gilded Palate. She, too, had been carefully noting the events since Keanu entered, especially Chef Rossi's arrogant behavior. This unexpected performance. What place would it find in her report? Just then, young waiter Finian Finn O'Connell, holding a water pitcher and a glass, once again approached Keanu's table. His face bore an expression of both shyness and embarrassment for his boss's attitude. "Good evening, sir," he whispered. "Do you need anything? Maybe I can help you with the menu." The sincerity in his voice and his attempt to help brought a faint smile to Keanu's face. Perhaps in this gilded, arrogant cage, there were still some who had not lost their sincerity and humanity. But which side would this young man take in the storm that was about to break? A storm that was gathering intensity with each passing moment. And when would Keanu's quiet patience finally run out in the face of Chef Rossi's next humiliating move? That evening at the Gilded Palate still held many secrets, surprises, and perhaps a major confrontation. Keanu Reeves, at his secluded table in the Gilded Palate, continued to peruse the heavy, leather-bound menu with an air of unhurried contemplation. The ambient noise from the kitchen, the occasional clatter of pans, and the distant murmur of elite conversations did little to disturb his focus. Chef Lorenzo Rossi, observing from the periphery, felt his irritation mount. This Mr. K was an enigma. His calm was unnerving, his lack of expected indignation baffling. Rossi thrived on control, on the subtle dance of power he played with his clientele. Keanu wasn't playing by his rules. Young Finian O'Connell approached again, his demeanor a mix of trepidation and a fledgling desire to offer genuine service. "Are you ready to order, sir? Or would you like more time?" he asked, his voice soft. Keanu looked up, his eyes meeting Finian's. "Thank you, Finian. I believe I am ready." He paused, then, with a perfectly neutral expression, stated, "I'll start with the Osetra caviar. And for the main course, I'd like to try your renowned Pigeonneau rôti aux truffes noires. To accompany that, the Chateau Petrus. I believe the 1990 vintage should be showing well." Finian's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He scribbled frantically, his hands shaking. This order was astronomical, far exceeding what even most of the Gilded Palate's wealthiest patrons ordered on a whim. He stammered a, "Very good, sir," and practically fled to the kitchen. When Chef Rossi saw the order, he first stared in disbelief. Then a slow, malicious grin spread across his face. "So," he hissed to his sous chef, "our little mystery man has an expensive palate, or he's a complete fool trying to call a bluff. Very well, let him have his grand meal. But ensure, Antoine," he addressed his most trusted sous chef, "that his experience is uniquely memorable. Use the slightly older caviar, the one that's almost past its prime, and the pigeon, the smallest bird we have. Let's see if his refined taste notices these subtle nuances." He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. This was his arena, and he would ensure this upstart learned his place. The other patrons continued their evening, largely oblivious, though Mr. and Mrs. Williams did cast a few more curious, disdainful glances towards Keanu's corner, when the sommelier, with a barely concealed sneer, clearly instructed by Rossi, presented the Chateau Petrus with minimal fanfare. James, the older businessman, however, observed this interaction with a slight frown, his earlier subtle nod to Keanu now tinged with concern. Miss Genevieve Croft, the critic, made a discreet note in a small leather-bound book, her expression unreadable. Keanu tasted the wine, a slight, almost imperceptible lift of an eyebrow, his only comment. He ate the caviar with slow, deliberate enjoyment, seemingly unfazed by the slightly off taste that only a true connoisseur might detect. The Pigeonneau rôti arrived, indeed a meager portion compared to the more lavish presentations at other tables. Keanu examined it for a moment, then began to eat with the same unhurried grace. Chef Rossi, unable to resist, decided to make a personal visit to Keanu's table under the guise of ensuring everything was to Mr. K.'s satisfaction. "Well, Bay K," Rossi began, his voice a silken threat, "I trust the simplicity of our Pigeonneau meets with your approval. It is a dish that requires a certain understanding to truly appreciate." Keanu dabbed his lips with his napkin. "Chef Rossi," he said, his voice still remarkably calm, "the bird itself is cooked competently, However, the truffle anointing is perhaps a shade too parsimonious for a dish of this stature. And the jus, he paused, while adequate, lacks the depth one might expect from your esteemed kitchen, almost as if it were rushed or made with secondary ingredients. The blood rushed to Chef Rossi's face. This was an outrage. This nobody, this vagrant in a worn jacket, was dissecting his Michelin-starred cuisine with the precision of a seasoned critic. "How dare you?" Rossi sputtered, his voice rising, drawing more attention. "You know nothing of the complexities of my art. This dish is a masterpiece." "Is it?" Keanu replied, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Rossi's rising fury. "Or is it a masterpiece of condescension, chef, served with a side of prejudice?" It was at this exact charged moment that Finian, approaching the table with the bottle of aged Chateau Margaux in his hand, became so overwrought by the tension between Chef Rossi's furious outburst and Keanu's calm but piercing gaze that his hand trembled. The bottle slipped from Finian's control and with a loud crash overturned onto Keanu and the table. Dark red wine soaked Keanu's simple but quality sweater and his pants from top to bottom. A stunned silence fell upon the gilded palate. Finian stood mortified, stammering apologies. "Sir, Mr. K, I've made a terrible mistake. Please forgive me." Chef Lorenzo Rossi. However, after an initial moment of shock at the expensive wine being spilled, a barely concealed, sarcastic smirk appeared on his face. This, he thought, was the perfect end for this scruffy man. But before he could continue his tirade, Keanu Reeves, who had remained perfectly dry, slowly rose from his seat. The earlier quiet amusement in his eyes was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "Actually, Chef Rossi," Keanu said, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere with an unexpected authority, "I don't think Finian is the one who will be leaving tonight." Everyone stared. What did this mysterious Mr. K mean? Chef Rossi, momentarily silenced by Keanu's audacity, could only gape. The real storm, it seemed, was just about to break. The opulent dining room of the Gilded Palate held its breath. Chef Lorenzo Rossi, drenched and fuming, stared at Keanu Reeves, who had just uttered a statement of such calm authority it was almost a physical blow. The surrounding patrons, including the Williamses, the observant James, and the keen-eyed critic Miss Genevieve Croft, were now fully engrossed in the unfolding drama. Young Finian O'Connell stood pale and trembling, expecting the sky to fall. What did you just say?" Chef Rossi finally managed to sputter, his voice a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Keanu met his glare evenly. "I said, Chef, that I believe Finian's employment here is secure. It's yours, however, that seems to be on rather thin ice." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Mr. and Mrs. Williams exchanged shocked glances. This was beyond anything they had anticipated. "Thin ice? My employment?" Rossi's laugh was harsh, a bark of incredulity. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the Gilded Palate. I built this restaurant from nothing into a Michelin-starred temple of gastronomy. You, a nobody in a charity shop jacket, dare to threaten me." "A temple, you say?" Keanu mused, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that made even the imperious Chef Rossi flinch. Interesting choice of words. Temples are usually places of respect, of humility before a higher art. What I've witnessed here tonight, Chef, is more akin to a court of arrogance, with you presiding as its most judgmental and, frankly, rather insecure monarch. Before Rossi could retort, Keanu continued, his gaze sweeping briefly over the other staff members who had gathered nervously at the periphery. Then to the restaurant manager, Mr. Michael Johnson, who had been summoned by a frantic Finian and was now approaching their area with a look of extreme consternation. "Mr. Johnson," Keanu said, his tone shifting slightly to one of polite but firm address as the manager arrived. "I believe we had an agreement regarding my anonymity for this evening's assessment." Mr. Michael Johnson, a man normally exuding unflappable professionalism, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He had recognized Keanu the moment he stepped onto the floor properly, his earlier vague description of Mr. K from Chef Rossi now clicking into sharp, horrifying focus. Mr. Reeves," Johnson stammered, his face paling. "My sincerest apologies. I had no idea Chef Rossi was unaware. I instructed the staff that Mr. K was to be treated with utmost discretion and respect as a valued associate of our ownership group." The words "associate of our ownership group" hung in the air. Chef Rossi's jaw, which had been working furiously, dropped open. His eyes darted from Keanu to Mr. Johnson and back again, a look of dawning, abject terror replacing his anger. He had not just mistreated a customer. He had mistreated someone with actual power, someone connected to the very people who signed his paychecks. Keanu gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Johnson. "Indeed, and the discretion has been quite illuminating, as has the respect." He then turned his full attention back to the now crumbling Chef Rossi. "You see, Chef, I often find that the true measure of an establishment or a man is not how they treat those they perceive as important, but how they treat those they believe have nothing to offer them. Tonight, you, and by extension, the gilded palate under your immediate supervision, failed that measure spectacularly. Miss Genevieve Croft, the critic, chose this moment to make her presence more formally known. She stood and addressed Mr. Johnson. "Mr. Johnson, I am Genevieve Croft of Gourmet Insider. I, too, have been observing the service this evening, and I must say, it has been an education in precisely how not to run a supposedly world-class restaurant. If Chef Rossi could have sunk through the marble floor, he would have. The combined weight of Keanu Reeves's quiet condemnation and Miss Croft's professional indictment was crushing." Keanu continued, "My test guests," he gestured vaguely to where Miss Croft was, and perhaps implied others he might have had observing, "have also noted a certain inconsistency in the welcome here." Mr. Johnson wrung his hands. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Croft, I am mortified. Chef Rossi, I expect you to apologize. Profusely." Chef Rossi, his voice a mere croak, began to stammer an apology, but Keanu raised a hand. "An apology to me is not what's required, Chef," Keanu said. "An apology is owed to your staff, like young Finian, whom you clearly intimidate. It's owed to every customer you've ever judged by their cover. And most importantly, it's owed to the very principles of hospitality and artistry you claim to uphold." He paused, then delivered his final thought for the chef. "I won't demand your dismissal, Chef Rossi. That's for Mr. Johnson and the board to decide. But I will make a suggestion. I am involved with a number of charitable culinary programs, places that feed the homeless, that teach at-risk youth how to cook, places where food is about sustenance and community, not status." He looked Rossi directly in the eye. "Perhaps a month or two working in such an environment, without the title, without the adulation, might reacquaint you with the true spirit of clay, or in your case, the true spirit of cuisine. It might teach you that every person who comes to a table, any table, deserves to be served with dignity." James, the older businessman who had watched the entire saga with quiet approval, now stood and addressed Mr. Johnson and Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, your suggestion is an inspired one. If Chef Rossi is amenable to such a sabbatical, my foundation would be honored to sponsor his placement and support the charity you mentioned. It seems like a seasoning, that could benefit many. The Gilded Palate, that temple of haute cuisine, had in a few short hours become a crucible of humility. Chef Lorenzo Rossi, stripped of his arrogance, faced a future far different from the one he had envisioned that morning. Keanu Reeves, having sought perhaps only a quiet meal and an observation, had instead orchestrated a profound lesson in human decency. The ripples of that evening would spread far beyond the luxurious walls of the restaurant, a testament to the fact that true class, true value, is always, ultimately, an inside job. And so, a quiet dinner sought by Keanu Reeves at the Gilded Palate turned into an unforgettable masterclass on humility, respect, and the true meaning of service. Chef Lorenzo Rossi, faced with the consequences of his own arrogance, was offered not just a reprimand, but a path to redemption. It reminds us that true status is not defined by wealth or appearance, but by character and how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less. This story from beyond the story shows that sometimes the most profound lessons are served in the most unexpected ways. What are your thoughts on second chances and the power of humility? Share your comments below. And for more inspiring narratives that go beyond the surface, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, may your own encounters be filled with understanding and genuine connection.